everyone, welcome back to the channel. We're Performance Agile. I'm Eric.
And I'm Vince.
And today we're going to cover Scrum versus Kanban and Scrumban.
Our quote for today is from Winston Churchill. And he was quoted as saying, "Success is not final and failure is not fatal."
So we've talked in past videos about Scrum and Kanban independently. So the next natural question that we know we're going to get is, well, what are the similarities? What are the differences? But if you've watched our videos, you're going to know right offhand that Scrum and Kanban are both Agile frameworks.
That's correct.
They just go about it a little bit different. And I think that's what the audience wants to know. What is different?
Right.
So starting off, when we talk about Kanban is a continual flow. It doesn't have the 2-week guardrails, the 2, 3, 4-week iterations per se that Scrum has. So Scrum has a period of time after work is done that says, hey, you should inspect and adapt. And Kanban says we should do this all the time. It should be a continual process that we engage in. Every day we're continuously improving. And it's a little freer. It's a little more open in terms of the length or horizon of tickets, of work items, of features of development, because it's not, the story should be defined, written, tested, closed, and potentially shippable inside an increment.
That's correct. Right. So rather than, well, let's just break it down this way. Let's try this. So in terms of the roles between Scrum, we have very defined roles, right? And I believe in our Kanban video, we articulated that probably have the same roles, very similar.
Maybe different titles.
Similar is the key, right? Not necessarily the same. But it's really, the roles in Scrum are very well defined, right? They have a role and a responsibility, right, and a purpose, and so everybody has their function to do as part of that framework. Kanban can use those same roles, but I don't think you're really going to find anywhere a hard and fast rule that you have to have, those same defined roles. So that would be one key difference between Scrum and Kanban. Would you agree?
I would.
Okay.
And Scrum has, as they have defined roles, they have defined ceremonies or what they call events that should take place. They say you should have a daily stand-up, which is a 15-minute time box meeting, that you should have a sprint planning, a backlog grooming, a sprint retro, and a demo. And it's all pretty well laid out at the increment at the frequency at which these meetings should happen. It's all very well defined. The teams don't really have to think about it. Where Kanban, you can have a daily stand-up, but there are some that propose that that's not necessary because if you're continuously improving well enough, it's really kind of a byproduct. It's a non-value add.
Yeah. So
it really just depends on the maturity of the team.
In our Kanban video, I believe I stated it more than once, where my personal feeling on those teams that transition to Kanban are high-performing, very mature teams. And that's one of the reasons why I feel so strongly about, very, very high-performing, very mature teams have that discipline, I believe is the word that I used, where, Scrum is, I hate to say it, but it's pretty regimented, right? Yes, it is iterative. Yes, we deliver incrementally, which is great. And yes, it is very short time boxed and it's very cyclical, but it is very, it is repeatable. You do this group of activities in a period of time and you repeat it and then you repeat it, right? Where Kanban is, in a perfect world, it is all about the flow, right? So it's a pull system by very mature, very experienced, highly skilled people. Somebody's queuing up the work and I'm pulling from it and I'm doing it and I'm working with my partners and my teammates and, we might be, doubled up or, swarming here and there. But that is the maturity of the team, to be able to recognize that and be able to swarm and help out each other and do that on a continual basis, right? Without interruption. So I think that that's a pretty big difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
What else you got?
A big difference between the two is the metrics that they use.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is continual pull on the Kanban side, you obviously cannot use the same metrics that a time box solution is going to use. And and as you said, teams that go from or start with Scrum, which is easy to learn, easy to understand, difficult to properly master,
Mm-hmm.
and over time, as you mature and you understand what it means not to only do Agile but to be Agile, and you transition into a pull ticketing system
Mm-hmm.
of highest priority works at the top. We're just going to pull. We're going to keep pulling. We're going to keep pulling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the metrics at which you gauge your success have to change. And Scrum's key metric is velocity, and the burn down chart or the epic burn up, burn down. I forget what they're called. I don't really.
Actually, you can do both.
Yeah, you can do both.
Hmm.
Where Kanban, the metrics are cycle. They're flow based. So average cycle time,
lead time, throughput, cumulative flow diagrams that represent those particular measures of those queues. And we're going to talk about those in detail in is it our next one? No, not quite our next one, but it is coming up, I promise. What else you got?
So the philosophy on how work changes. Because Scrum is really good about change management. Just not once a sprint starts. Once a sprint starts, the work that you have said, this is the work we're going to take on in the sprint that supports our sprint goal,
mm-hmm.
doesn't change. Well, okay, caveat, it can change as long as it does not impact the sprint goal, which I don't think a lot of people understand when you're talking about sprint goals, because I haven't seen too many Scrum teams that really understand and do a sprint goal correctly.
That don't do sprint goals. That's right. I think that's missed a lot.
So you in a perfect Scrum world, you would say, this sprint, 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever it is, here's our goal,
mm-hmm.
the objective we're trying to achieve, and whatever stories you pull in, features, tasks, whatever you name it.
Based on your roadmap and your release plan. Right. It is a very structured, very organized process.
It's in support of the goal.
Right. So
Scrum says once you've started your sprint,
mm-hmm.
don't change.
Mm-hmm.
As long as it does not impact the sprint goal. Where Kanban, because it's a pulling ticket system.
We still have goals, right?
We do, but it's a lot easier to adapt on the fly, but you don't want to break your whip limits. You don't want to wreck your flow.
Right.
So you can make changes as long as you're not kneecapping yourself with unnecessary
I know what you're trying
tickets.
to say. Yeah, Kanban is much more flexible with regard to change. Where Scrum, you don't want to introduce change into the sprint. That's very bad, very, very bad.
Yeah.
So let's see. We talked about the roles. We talked about ceremonies. We talked a little bit about the process. We talked a little bit about the metrics. What are we missing?
Well, some of the similarities.
Okay.
I think we're going to see a lot of the same tool sets.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Jira, the Atlassian tool suite there, they support Scrum and Kanban equally.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually some Scrum boards that have a Kanban-like board in it. They just call it a task board instead of a Kanban. It's just a different way of them visualizing their tickets.
Ironically, it is a Kanban, right?
It is, but they just don't call it that.
It's a sprint board.
They call it a sprint board or a task board.
Right. What else?
So you can still do estimation in the same way. You can. You don't have to, but you can.
Yeah.
So
estimation really doesn't work in Kanban the same way it does in.
Well, you can do like relative estimation in like a T-shirt sizing, which you can do in Scrum if you're not using story points.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a different way for a Scrum team to gather and garner their velocity is based on relative T-shirt sizing, which you can do in Scrum to give you a ballpark estimate of weight of effort.
So when we talked about planning for Scrum and we use the Fibonacci estimation, right? the team, those numbers serve a purpose for planning in Scrum. The estimation, if it's used the same way, is to support the story as to if a piece of work that's pulled into the work queue in Kanban, if we're measuring cycle time, right? So once it enters into the queue, when does it get out of the queue?
Mm-hmm.
If a particular piece of work sits in the queue longer than, say, some of the others, and it's throwing off your cycle time, and you go and you go, well, why is that? And you go in and you look and you go, oh, well, this work was more complex based on the estimation of this work versus some of the others. Oh, I see. I understand now that this work was more complex, or which caused it to take more time in the queue.
Mm-hmm.
That's, in my mind, probably one of the most beneficial purposes of doing estimation in Kanban, is so that you can, because metrics are metrics, right? Metrics are no good without a narrative, right? You have to have the story behind any report or any metric. And that's a good example of why you need to know, have the understanding of not just the numbers, but, I get it now, I understand.
Right.
Okay.
But like you said, story points aren't necessarily the best practice in Kanban, because story points aren't really going toward like a
Exactly.
Kanban team's philosophy.
They're not, right?
So you can do relative t-shirt size, small,
Mm-hmm.
medium, large, extra large.
Right.
Which again you can do in Scrum. It's
Which
just
would
not,
still tell the same story.
Yeah, it's just
Right.
not the standard team
Right. But
practice.
they're not
in
used
Scrum.
for planning.
Right.
Right. All right, what else you got?
So the team size, Scrum calls for 7 plus or minus 2,
Mhm.
so anywhere from 5 to 9. But again, it is a product owner, Scrum Master, which is taking up. There are roles on the team, but they're not included in that 5 to 9.
Correct.
So it's 5 to 9 developers. And again, there's no title other than developer
Mm-hmm.
in a perfect world. And Kanban says, okay, great, you have a Scrum Master and product owner or Agile team lead or Agile team facilitator. Whatever the title, the title changes.
Right.
But you can have some specialists on your development team. You can have generalists. You can have a mix, but
You have whoever you need.
they allow for other roles other than developer.
Right.
Is I think is a difference, but the team size is roughly going to be the same.
But it can vary. It's so in Kanban, if you have a body of work where whoever's pulling that work, recognizes that, oh, you know what, I'm going to need some help on this.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not already, on the team with that skill set, then they can go out and find, the right skill to help them get through that body of work, to keep that work going.
Right.
So yeah, it's a little different. All right, so we just finished talking about the differences and the similarities between Scrum and Kanban. So now what's this thing, Scrumban, right? Is it really a real thing?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a real
And
thing.
it tries to pull a little bit from both framework and try to do a little mix and match.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a little bit of a detailed breakdown on what Scrumban tries to achieve.
Right. So, as the name would imply, it is kind of taking Scrum and Kanban and just kind of smushing them together. The little bits and pieces of each one. It's used a little differently than one or the other would typically be used for. So let's talk about some of those. Well, let's just talk about, how Scrumban is really kind of organized and executed, if you will. I guess that's the best way to do it. So the teams for Scrumban, are they more similar to Scrum or more similar to Kanban?
Given the limitation on a Scrum team of 7 plus or minus 2, I'd have to say they kind of align more to a Kanban free form.
Yeah.
You have who you need to
Yeah.
get the job done. So Scrumban pulls its team structure from Kanban.
Agreed. You get a star for the day. That's good.
I'll take my gold star.
All right, take your gold star. All right. Now, what about the roles? So if we're executing on Scrumban, what do the roles look like in Scrumban?
So, I would argue that if you're going to attempt Scrum
Mm-hmm.
in any way,
Mm-hmm.
a Scrum Master should be there.
Mm-hmm.
Because by definition of the role of a Scrum Master, right, they are the facilitator of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So, if somebody on the team is confused as to what Scrum or Kanban or the mixture of both is,
Mhm.
somebody there to guide the team through what the heck they're engaged in
we like Scrum Masters.
is
right?
important.
We like Scrum Masters.
Somebody to prioritize and own the work,
Mhm.
called a product owner,
Mhm.
and developers.
Okay, so you sound like you're advocating that Scrumban kind of lean towards using the roles of Scrum rather than not using the roles that Kanban would tend to gravitate towards.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that there can be, house rules on this one where whoever is really executing or implementing Scrumban in your situation, I think you can mix and match in this case, and you can probably get away with that.
It's needs of the business.
Yeah, I think you're okay there. What about ceremonies?
So the meetings, the ceremonies, they kind of fall more in line with the Scrum style setup. Because I only say that because the work cycle is
Mhm.
done in iterations in Scrumban. They have a 2-week iteration, so having a 2-week planning cycle, retro cycle, demo cycle does make sense. But they can also be done as needed, ad hoc,
Mm-hmm.
where they're not a hard and fast. You must do these.
Yeah.
They're highly recommended.
Yeah, see, I think my understanding of Scrumban is that it's a little looser. So you're not following the strictness of Scrum, because if you're going to do that, then you're just going to do Scrum. So it's kind of like taking Scrum and Kanban and going,
Right.
right. So you're kind of cherry picking the things that you want to do and don't want to do out of each one. And I think in this case, we really didn't even touch upon yet why you would want to use Scrumban. We probably should have let in with that. It's for quick hits. It's for probably best used for a production team that's working on a backlog of fixes. Defects coming out of production. Scrumban is a good fit for that. Because you don't need a very big team. And you don't need to be very structured. Sometimes you got to work them as they come in. So that's probably a good example of why you would do Scrumban and not one of the others, because it's a little bit fast and loose with a little bit of structure just neatly tucked in there, to keep things from going too awry, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So that the meetings, they're or ceremonies, they're good, I guess, but really
It's
not as
again,
necessary,
it's the
right?
needs of the business, the organization, the team.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to do all those ceremonies, might as well just do Scrum, right?
Well, yeah, if we're taking some of the Scrum philosophy,
Mhm.
It is built on inspect and adapt. And so because the Scrumban workflow is a 2-week iteration, right?
Scrumban is probably less. They probably go on an average of a week, I think.
Okay, so even a week, XP does sprints and iterations in a week,
Mhm.
but they still have an inspect and adapt element
Yeah,
at the
no,
end.
I'm not saying they don't. I'm not saying they don't. It's just probably a little looser than the structure of Scrum if you were just doing Scrum.
Yeah, no, it's not as rigid.
Okay, what else you got?
So I think I already mentioned the work cycle, where Scrumban says it's a 2-week at most, I should say, a 2-week at most iteration. So
Right.
yeah, you can do 1 week or 2 weeks, but they're really trying to get you to focus on small, bite-sized pieces of work, like you said, quick hits. So we're not waterfalling our iterations, right? As some people tend to do with these mammoth features that they're like, we could do that in an iteration.
So that is more like Scrum than Kanban, where Scrum says you can go up to 4 weeks,
Yeah.
right? And Kanban says, well, there are no limitations, there are no time boxes. Scrumban's kind of saying, we are thinking, probably the right time frame for that is a week, but we can go up to 2 weeks, sure. It's interesting. I think how somebody decided to coin the phrase, right? Because I think even some Scrum teams are probably at times, kind of falling into Scrumban at times, right? And I don't know. I find it interesting the way that some people, will be creative. Invent necessity is the mother of invention, right? So hey, we've got this situation, and we need to be reactive to it, but we want to be agile. So like, what's the best way to do it? Well, we got Scrum and we got Kanban. Which one do we do? Well, what do you say? We smash them together and kind of pick and choose from. I love it. I think it's great. Whoever came up with that, that was pretty good.
See, the way I take this is, how you're saying some agile teams start with Scrum and graduate into. This kind of feels like the training
like a middle
wheels.
ground.
Yeah,
it does.
It's like, man, we started as a Scrum team and we're out here doing our iterations.
Yeah.
Or we're getting a little bit more, we're getting a little bit better.
Yeah.
Start taking some of those strict rules away.
It's probably a good transition.
Working a little slow.
Yep.
And hey, now we're in
Let's
Kanban.
just go.
Kind of. Yeah. That middle ground there, because it pulls from both sides and it tries to marry them up.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I do. I like it. I love creative minds, and so this is just a good example of some necessity that drove this and it stuck. You know what I mean? So somebody threw some spaghetti on the wall and it stuck on this one. So whoever you are, congratulations. I think this is pretty cool.
Yeah, and if you're still with us here and you have any further questions on Scrumban, feel free to drop that in the comment section, and we will research it and get it back to you, because this isn't something I can say I have exclusively worked in a Scrumban team like I have with my Scrum and my Kanban teams. Like I can say that I've worked in both frameworks exclusively. I can't say I've worked in this one, so it's a little not known to me.
See, now your challenge is to find the right opportunity to implement that, right? And see how it goes. Experiment, folks. Dare to be, an experiment.
I've even used XP, so I'm actually looking forward to talking about that one.
Yeah, that's next. That's next.
That is a dense topic.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what.
That's right. It drove a lot of what we do today. It is very influential. All right. So what do you say? We want to wrap this up?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, that's it, everyone. Thanks for joining us on our video. We hope you enjoyed that. Please give us a like. Hit subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. And we will see you on the next video.